trying to get you folks to understand this is how the smoke and mirrors works. I just simply want to find out what happened to the American dream as someone who is living the American nightmare. You got to know the facts, and if we came together, we could overcome the corruption that's murdering us all.
I'm just trying to make the world aware of the truth, and I've got it.
And I think there's an incredibly important thing to clarify right now. So many people that are supporters of Trump really want to try to steer everybody who might lean Trump because they hate the other guy, and because everybody needs to make this like equally sort of palpable that it's like, well, it's not just this guy, it's the other guys, and everybody wants to make this a battle between the red and the blue. What I've been telling you the entire time is that this is the distraction that's owned by this, the puppeteers that own both. And who is they? Well, it's Wall Street. It's our financial system that created the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended, starting with the 2000. Well, it goes way back, but really it just came to a head, and the ultimate hijacking came to a head with the Obama administration through the 2008 great financial crisis. Obama didn't start this, but he cleaned it up for Wall Street. Obama was Wall Street's boy. Biden has been in this machine for maybe 4+ decades, right? Delaware, the state of Delaware, is all about the land of LLCs, limited liability companies, and tax write-offs, which these corporations can create the plausible deniability and bankruptcy so that they can create all sorts of fraud. Now, this isn't the ultimate reason it was created this way, but it's what it's become. Ultimately, because of the Federal Reserve policy, which is at the apex of this entire thing, that creates the liquidity and buys back toxic assets created criminally by this massive system. I have told you over and over and over, the machine of Wall Street has hijacked the United States of America, and they've created what we call the divine rights of kings because they're above the law. The machine of our financial sector created the coup d'etat for all of these firms on Wall Street, whether they're too big to fail banks, which is like Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. At that time, it became Goldman Sachs, even though they were, an investment operation that had to become a bank holding company because they were fucking bankrupt, but because they had so much incredible power within the machinations of Congress as well as in the Department of Justice, they were able to cover up this entire scheme that illegally buried tens of millions of people that then our judges, our judiciary, whitewashed and bulldozed millions of people without documentation. The whole thing was a criminal syndicate beyond comprehension that buried tens of millions of people and gave trillions of dollars to the guys who did this. Now, when I talk about Trump, everybody wants to say, well, what about Biden? What about Biden? What about Biden? Well, of course, Biden and freaking Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Those guys are the kingpins under which the, not just the financial sector, but the white shoe law firms all basically calibrate and created this getaway. And then ultimately backdoored the Federal Reserve to put the full faith and credit of the United States to backstop the largest criminal racket in the history of the world. Okay, did I say it enough? Biden has been a part of this the whole time. Now, here's the thing. Biden was never the mastermind. He's just a yes guy that's like, okay, I'll do this, I'll do some favors here, and I'll play ball, and I'll be the nice guy and Uncle Joe, and I'll put my glasses on, then I'll be Joey B and all of that kind of stuff, right? And many of you call him Dark, Brandon and all of that kind of shit. The bottom line is he's nowhere near the mastermind of this situation. It's the lobbyists, it's the white shoe law firms, it's those that get inside the think tanks that ultimately control policy through their congressional representatives in both Congress and the Senate that they've bought nonstop, really my entire lifetime, but on overdrive since we got Citizens United. And then it created these backdoors through dark money that also did the same thing for the Supreme Court of the United States. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the corruption is what births fascism. So if you want to get into this he said, she says about whether or not this midterm is about fascism versus democracy. It's not. It's about the freaking criminal oligarchy that's backstopped with the full faith and credit of the United States, that has absolute control, that is toying and playing with everyone. But here's the reality. Those on the MAGA side, many of those people are much more willing to go to the streets, go to the Capitol, create the coup d'etat for a vision that somebody that they're following, like Donald Trump, is somebody that they would actually give credence to. A guy that lied 5,000 times in office and has been a part of this scam the whole time. If you read the indictment, which I have, the 222-page indictment from the New York AG's office, everything that Trump has been involved with from that particular standpoint is what we show you in the con. It's called control fraud. And so everybody in the mainstream media, particularly those at MSNBC that are in on it, that are hired to cherry pick everything against Trump so that they can cover for this system up here that I'm telling you has complete control of everything. I'm a patriot. The thing is, let's give you an idea. Let me give you a quick history lesson. Okay? Please, by a show of hands, why did the United States become the United States? Why? Well, because we rebelled against King George III in England. Why? Because they had absolute control and were corrupt, and they were raping and pillaging not settlers, the people that lived in the colonies, the colonists, whatever. And the bottom line is that they started to rebel against unfair taxation, right? Just manipulation, pulling up money from their land, their effort, and everything else. And so that gave us the notion with the genius founders of our country that basically could not stomach corruption so much that they went in the streets. Then they wore in these crazy moccasins in the cold at Valley Forge, and they fought for like over a year and a half against insane obstacles, and they won eventually. And it wasn't a short-term span. I think most of us think, oh yeah, since we did the Declaration of Independence in 1776, that's when we won the war. No, the war went on against the British for 30 years basically? And then we ended up not too long after that. Let's think about all the wars the United States has, right? So you go from independence, then to all of the different merchant battles that took place like in the Barbary Coast and all of the different trade all around the world. That was kind of ongoing for 30 years. Then you have, the battles in the West and how the West was won that ultimately, starts out in, all over the United States, really. But in terms of chronology, the Battle of Texas, and then the Battle of Mexico, and then we had the Civil War, then we had the Indian Wars, and then we had constant movement outward. And then ultimately, there was a 30-year reprieve after the Civil War into the industrialization that led us to the wars that we've been dealing with ever since, right? World War I, World War II, that created a situation that we became a superpower. But internally in the United States, we had trust busting by Teddy Roosevelt that went against the robber barons because they had complete control, which was antithetical to the notion of liberty and justice for all. So then we had trust busting that basically broke up the big corporations and the oligarchs and the robber barons. And then we had this mass movement between, let's call it 1895 and 1929, which ultimately came from huge economic shifts. So we created the Federal Reserve to stop economic crises as a backdoor, but as it turns out, they were there and created for the financial system from the very beginning. And ultimately, that financial system ultimately serves those who have the most assets. In this country, we create debt against assets. And so assets, for example, of the rich is what we protect above all else, i.e. quantitative easing. That's what took place after the 2008 great financial crisis. But going back to that section between 05 roughly to 1930, you ultimately had trust busting, then the Federal Reserve to create stability, and then ultimately we end up in World War I, which was the war to end all wars. And of course, that was not the case. We ended up with World War II, which we didn't want to get into. And what was happening behind the scenes is we had the Great Depression. The Great Depression was predicated on all sorts of speculation and deception that blew up the fucking world, that led us to World War II, that was an exact replica of what happened in 2008. Or I should say, 2008 was a replica of what happened in the Great Depression. And as a result of the Great Depression, what we ended up doing was the FBR administration came in and picked up what was happening before in the Hoover administration when they put Ferdinand Pecora in to figure out what Wall Street did, and they found found out about all the thievery on Wall Street, and they created what was known as Glass-Steagall. That was to break up the ability for banks to create this obfuscation and this deception to be able to speculate with other people's money. So then we had relative stability after we had this massive war where the sacrifice and the implications of World War II were beyond any of our comprehension. And that was our grandparents' generation, which we call the greatest generation. They fought on two fronts. They ended up defeating Hitler and fascism. And then we had this incredibly robust middle class that happened as a result of the New Deal. And then we had unions and we rebuilt the world. That was industrialization. And we had that for about 3 decades until we got into about the 70s. And that's when a thing called neoliberalism supposedly created a kind of globalism that ultimately manifested into this reality that we have, that I call corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate. What's happening in England right now, for example, is the British pound was crashing, and now the Central Bank of England is starting to do its own form of QE. They're saying to save pensions, but it's really to save the upper crust. So what we've done over and over and over, and this is the system we have, I call it corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate. It's propped up by the central bank, which is the full faith and credit of the United States, that goes to backstop the immense criminality that we show you in the con at www.con.tv, of which Donald Trump was a major player. Okay? And then Biden was always behind the scenes. So what we're talking about right now is all of you, particularly who are young, are basically, oh my God, what team am I on and why? And if you support Trump and you're like, hey, Patrick, I was on your side until you started talking about Trump because this is all anti-MAGA. Let's be clear. You cannot be against corruption and for Donald Trump. But at the same time, in my opinion, it's not even an opinion, it's the fact. You cannot be for democracy and for this corporate oligarchy that is, over the top of a criminal system that is the mob and think that you've got democracy. Do you get it? Look, abortion is supposedly the big thing on the ballot for a lot of people. For those of you who are paying attention to this freaking stream of consciousness, this truth bomb, what I'm trying to tell you is, okay, let's look at it in front of these terms. You want to abort? Okay, so if corruption burrs fascism, and you want to get rid of fascism, then you gotta abort stupidity and complicity, because, like I've been telling you the whole time, the professionals betrayed us to save themselves. And they're doing it again. There's going to be this situation where we could see another 2008 very soon. We might be on the precipice of this. I'm not quite sure, because the interest rates have been going up and down and up. And the interest rates have been going up from the Fed, but then the market's going up and down because they're playing roulette, because they don't know whether or not the Fed is going to start getting back into the same sorts of policies that we've done for the last 13 years. That started, the world that you live in began in 2009, because Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally to backstop bankrupt shadow financial institutions because they had absolute political control, which is called tyranny. Get it? And so if you're a patriot, going back to the beginning of the United States, where you believe in liberty and justice for all, and you would have fought on the side of justice for everyone from the very beginning, and you are not about slavery, and you are not about white supremacy, and you are not about Nazism, then you have to fight for a patriotism. And what are you willing to fight for? That's the question. Now, the only way to do this peacefully is to have everybody knowledgeable of what's happening, because in the midterms, BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, is presumably not on the ballot. But neither is a movement to purge corruption. We've got to rise to the moment. That's what Patrick Lovell is doing. And for all of you out there, because I know that I'm not going to be able to win 100% of you over, but I'm trying every single day to win more and more of you over, because you got to understand it's corruption that is murdering the American dream. And I found the murder weapon and the whole intent to do so, which would blow up the world and turn it right side up if you guys understood how it worked. So quit pretending like you know something without the facts. Watch the con. www.thecon.tv. If you can't watch it because you can't afford $10, then go to the library. It's free. But when you see it and you get enlightened, because enlightenment's for the bold, share with the whole fucking world. Because this is what they have been hiding the whole time. Who is they? The media works for the system that has collapsed the world on our heads, and they use the central banks based on the full faith and credit of the United States that was won through these wars against all of the tyranny from the beginning. Do you get it? Do you see it? If you have questions, ask questions instead of judgment. What you get is all the time in this stupid social media is clowns that have no idea how to get on first base with anything the system does, let alone the history of the United States. What I'm trying to do desperately is give you perspective, because I believe that we've been living on borrowed time since 2009. It's insane that the world doesn't know this. And it's insane that I'm the only one who can bring you the truth. For better or for worse, I'm here and I'm going the distance, onwards and upwards. I just made a promise to myself that I was going to find the answers.